This is King Charles III. It's currently October 2022, and if everything goes to plan, then King Charles will have his coronation ceremony in a few months' time. Now, it's not quite clear at the moment whether the coronation ceremony will follow the protocols that have been established over, centuries, or whether he's going to go for a somewhat more streamlined event. However, if they do follow the standard situation, then there are typically two crowns which are involved in the ceremony. There's the crown of St. Edward, and then there's the imperial state crown. And that's the crown that I'm beginning to paint on mixed media paper with Inktense watercolors, as you can see right on screen now. The initial drawing has been created using a unit pin marker. Now, the imperial state crown has quite an interesting history. This is actually, I can't remember the exact number, but it's something like the 6th or 7th version of the crown. So I was doing a little bit of YouTube research because, in full disclosure, I'm not an historian. So I've just kind of done a little bit of reading around this to find out some interesting facts for you. And apparently the crown has often been redesigned for either political reasons, to make it seem even more impressive visually, or simply to fit the head of the next wearer. So, for example, this version of the crown has, I think, thousands of diamonds, and as you can see, lots of large jewels, on it, and consequently, it's very heavy to wear. And it would be even more so if it wasn't for the clever design of the crown. So the four bands which come up from the sort of lower headband, so you've got the horizontal headband going round the head, and then you've got four headbands, two at the side, one at the front and back, arching up to meet at the top. Those are all designed in a way which was inspired by the crown which was first made for Queen Victoria. And the design is rather intricate. It's a very lightweight wire design with holes in, and that lightweight wire design then supports the jewels. So the jewels are heavy enough, but this light framework is quite an ingenious solution to having the whole crown not unbearably heavy. Now, the crown you see here and St. Edward's crown are both referred to as enclosed crowns. So before the use of enclosed crowns in England, most crowns apparently were just a single headband going round the forehead, round the back, the sides of the head, round the back of the head, and then you had, a little bit of ornamental stuff going on along the top edge. But Henry VIII was keen to break away from the Pope and the Roman Church. So he decided, I'm going to make England its own empire. We're going to do our own thing. And obviously the people around him said, well, that's a pretty good idea. And apparently sentiment had been building for this for some time, I learned quite recently. And I'll put references to the videos from where I got this information in the description below this video. But general opinion had been pretty sort of anti-Roman Church. The general idea that, England should be able to do its own thing separate from the Pope had been going around, and Henry was going to do it. He was going to make England its own empire. So everybody said, okay, Henry, well, that sounds pretty cool. How are we going to do it? He said, well, we're going to design a new crown. We've got the open crowns. We want an enclosed crown. And why we're having an enclosed crown? Well, basically, the Roman emperors and the Byzantine emperors, if that's how you pronounce it, they had enclosed crowns. So if we want to be an empire, we need an enclosed crown, which I think is a little bit of a funny juxtaposition, in that he's making this big statement that he wants to do his own thing. He wants his country to do its own thing. But the way he's going to telegraph that to the world is by copying what others have done. But, I guess that's just the way of the world. So that's where the word imperial comes from, apparently, for this imperial state crown. It's to do with England defining its own destiny. And then the word state apparently refers to the fact that when you're wearing this thing, when you're wearing this incredibly ornate, bejeweled, very, very visually impressive and, of course, extremely expensive item, then you're in your most royal state. Whether you're king or queen, you're wearing this to say, basically, look at the state of me. I am the king or I am the queen. So that's where the name, the imperial state crown, comes from. And it's my understanding that the St. Edward's crown, which is even more ornate than this and has been around a lot longer, the reason that's not used as much, even though you see it on emblems throughout the UK even now, the reason that's not used so much is simply because it is so incredibly heavy. And while the imperial state crown is heavy, it's not as heavy as St. Edward's crown. So what generally happens in the coronation, I believe, is St. Edward's crown is kind of carried in, and if placed on the monarch's head, it's only very briefly while they're sitting, and then it's removed, and then the imperial state crown is worn as the king or the queen leaves the coronation. And this one is also worn at the opening of Parliament as well. So this one is very much a symbol of the UK and its history. So what you can see is, as I've been chatting away, I've been adding loose coatings of watercolour. And when you're painting something as ornate as this, you can either try and capture every single detail in, almost a photorealistic way, or you can take a much looser impressionist approach, and that's what I've been doing here. So I'm just looking at the biggest patches of colour and tone and just putting them in very loosely without worrying too much about getting the shapes exactly right. And the idea is that eventually, hopefully, the overall effect will still read as the imperial state crown. Now, apparently the Queen, who obviously passed away not that long ago, she found this crown so heavy that when she was giving a speech, she had to actually she had to make sure she kept her posture completely upright. And if she's looking to read from a document, she couldn't risk tipping her head forward, A, because the crown might fall, but B, the crown was so heavy that you could actually risk hurting your neck. So what you had to do is keep yourself completely upright and then bring your hand up to nearer eye level with the piece of paper that you're reading from, so that you could give a speech in that way. So some disadvantages to wearing this crown, as incredibly valuable as it is. And again, I'll put a link to that little interview with the Queen in the description below this video. Now, there's actually a little bit of a personal story behind this painting. So a friend of mine who sadly passed away a few years ago, a chap called Dave Drew, ran a local bicycle shop in the area. And Dave he's an absolutely super guy, did a huge amount for the region. He was instrumental in getting a BMX track and bicycle park going in the local area. He sponsored and helped organize local events, both close to him and a little bit further afield. He would always help out local riders, very, very generous with his time. I ended up working with him quite a lot because for a short time I ran my own little company manufacturing and designing bicycle hubs, and it was just a small company. It was little more than a hobby, really, but nevertheless we sold quite a few hubs all across the world, but we did so on a limited budget. And Dave, at that time when he was running his shop, he would run an advert each month in the internationally distributed bike magazine, and he very kindly let me advertise my hub, my product, through his advert completely for free. And in addition to that, we would spend many an hour sat in his shop discussing the ways to improve the design of bicycles and things like that. And I even ended up doing some artwork for him. So this is a portrait of him I painted, of him in his bike shop. And I also created a mural in the shop for him. And I also designed the odd cartoon here or there to advertise BMX events and things like that. Anyway, you are now no doubt wondering, that's lovely, Mike, but what has this got to do with King Charles III and the imperial state crown? Well, when I was in the shop one day with Dave, we sat chatting away, and this would have been back in the 90s. And before Dave ran a bike shop, one of the jobs he had, I think he was an engineer by training, but he also worked as an agricultural equipment salesman. So the area we live in, Devon, which is in the southwest of the UK, is an agricultural area. There's a lot of farming. And so Dave would work for a company which sold tractors and trailers and things like this, other machinery, to farmers. And part of that job meant maintaining a working relationship with local farmers who are scattered about the countryside in often quite remote areas. Now, we're very lucky in Devon to have a region called Dartmoor, which is a massive national park where animals are owned, but they're able to run wild. And if you watch my channel regularly, you'll know that Dartmoor is a big inspiration for me and for some of the animal paintings that I do. Anyway, back to the now king. At the time, he was called Prince Charles, Prince of Wales. So Dave is going to a remote farm on Dartmoor, driving down narrow country lanes with very high hedges up on the high ground. And he comes to the edge of the farm, comes to the gate, and a chap, I'm not sure whether it was a policeman or a guy in plain clothes, but either way, a chap sort of stops him and indicates that he needs to stop his car. And Dave says, all right, how are you? And the guy says, where are you going? And Dave apparently said, he goes, well, I'm not being funny, but what's it got to do with you? And the guy, I think it must have been a plainclothes guy, because I don't think he would have spoken that way to somebody who was obviously a policeman. But the guy said, he goes, well, what's going on is there's a royal visit going on the farm. We just need to make sure that everything's safe. And so Dave explained who he was. He goes, yeah, that's okay. Just carry on up the drive, park, and then, in you go. So Dave gets there and he finds that the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, is visiting this farm. And I think Prince Charles then, I don't know how the property varies when you go from being a prince to a king, but basically the royal family own huge amounts of land in the UK, and Prince Charles at that time owned a lot of Dartmoor. So when he wanted to get away from the world, get away from his sort of civil duties and all the ceremonies and meetings and traveling he had to do, one of the ways he would relax is he would come out to this farm and he would go and do some manual work on the farm, digging ditches or just doing farm labor. So apparently what would happen is he would be off in a valley somewhere working away. And of course, when you're up on Dartmoor, you really are away from the rest of the world. You're away from the city and the towns, and you really are in the middle of nowhere in the best possible way. It's absolutely beautiful countryside. You can get yourself very easily so that you can't even see a single building. So a very relaxing, peaceful atmosphere. He could work away, and then just over the brow of the hill, there might well be a helicopter or certainly a security team just for his safety. So Dave actually then got to meet the Prince of Wales and had a chat with him, and he said he came across as an absolutely super guy. And one of the little stories he told was, he said, apparently, he goes, now you won't have noticed my shoes, will you? And apparently the shoes he was wearing were made from leather from the Mary Rose, which is a ship which sank disastrously hundreds of years ago in the Solent, which is a stretch of water off the south coast of England. And then hundreds of years later, in the 1980s, possibly the 90s, I think, they were able to lift the wreck out of the sea. They found it and they lifted it out. And what was so incredible about this wreck was that half of it had been submerged under the silt of the seabed. And consequently, the lifestyles of not only the powerful, but very unusually the normal people were preserved in the silt. And so there's now a museum in Southampton, which I visited just a few months ago, actually. And you can see not only the wreck, which they pulled out of the water, but you can see a lot of the artifacts like gaming dice or knives or forks, the general everyday things of normal life from hundreds of years ago are now on display for everybody to appreciate. So if you ever get the chance to go and see that museum, the Mary Rose Museum, I would highly recommend it. Anyway, so back to the painting and how this is involved with my friend Dave and the now King Charles III. So the idea of the painting is to not only create this image of the imperial state crown, but I like the idea of somebody as high up of that still just needing to go away, get away from life and do a little bit of digging. And if you watch the channel regularly, you'll know that I enjoy painting belted Galloway cattle as well. So the idea of the finished painting is to have the crown, as you can see, and then over on the left, I'm going to put a little belted Galloway cow. And then the crown has just been put down on the grass. So the idea is, now obviously in real life, the king won't be just, wandering around with this crown on his head. But I like the idea of the finished image being called the King's Day Off. So the idea is he's come out to Dartmoor because he's had enough of the day-to-day. He puts his crown down on the ground, on the grass. He's walked over the brow of the hill, which is why we can't see him, into one of the deep valleys of Dartmoor. And perhaps he's doing a bit of digging or just surveying the land. And a belted Galloway cow, because they roam wild on Dartmoor from time to time. the Belted Galloway cows just sort of come along to see, what's going on. So there's the finished painting, the King's Day Off. Hope you enjoyed this little video. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you next Sunday for the next episode of the Sunday Art Show. Thanks very much for watching.